Welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Keating. In this podcast, we talk about it all, our parenting, our partnering, and our professional lives, because they are all a part of us, and we were never meant to do this alone. Hello, parents. Hello. Welcome back to the Heartful Parent Podcast. I've got a really interesting conversation on deck for you today. And it may be one that when you first sort of think about it or hear what it's about, you may go, ooh, I'm not sure I want to talk about that. And I would understand that because most of us do not like talking about death and dying. And you may also say, why are we talking about death and dying on a parenting, partnering, and professional life podcast? Well, I think the reason will become abundantly clear as we go. But I would so invite you to open your mind and heart to this important topic and this really phenomenal guest. Her name is Maureen Kuras, and she has over 35 years as a registered nurse in oncology, bone marrow transplant, ICU, and hospice. Throughout her nursing career, she was privileged to provide end-of-life care for many, many people. And when she ended her nursing career, she became the founder and CEO of Radiant Morning, Mourning. And as the CEO of Radiant Morning, she is on a mission to guide families to decide, document, and discuss their final chapter plans to bring peace to those who live on, right? Those who are left behind. Too often, she saw the devastation that occurred when families hadn't had candid conversations with those who matter the most. And she knows that it can be different when we talk about it and when we plan for it. Maureen is a certified advanced care planning facilitator with Honoring Choices Pacific Northwest, Before I Go Solutions based in the UK, and is also an end-of-life doula with the Gentle Passage Doula Collective. She has so much wisdom in this space. And so in this conversation, we really dig into two primary things. And the first is, how do we talk to our aging parents and relatives, especially for those of us who are in the sandwich generation, right? Stuck between taking care of our parents and taking care of our kids. And maybe stuck isn't the right word, but sometimes it can feel that way, right? And so we talk about what are the conversations that we need to be having with those aging family members to make sure that we are honoring them and their wishes. And then we turn the conversation to what are the conversations that we can and need to be having with our children at all the different stages that they are. You know, the conversation is obviously different for a 5-year-old and a 25-year-old, but what Maureen shares is that our children, even our young children, are not just capable of understanding and talking about death, but that it's important that we do that with them to remove the fear and the sort of taboo nature of it. I love this conversation. Maureen shares some beautiful stories. I share a few stories, and I hope you enjoy it. Maureen, welcome to the Heartful Parent Podcast.
Oh, thanks, Christy, for having me.
I am really excited to have you here, even though I know the topic that we're about to dig into. Some people might be like, really? We're going to listen to you talk about death for, 40 minutes or whatever. But yeah, I think this is such an important conversation, as, I know I'm preaching to the choir. You know that.
I do. I think it's an important conversation too. That's why I have them. But it is a taboo topic that no one likes to talk about.
Yeah. I want to start from the very beginning, which is really asking you, how in the world did you end up talking about this all the time and having this be the focus of your professional life?
I'm a nurse, and my first job out of nursing school that I could get was working on an oncology unit. And I was terrified because I came from a family that didn't talk about death and dying. when someone died, we went to the funeral, but we didn't talk about grief. We didn't talk about anything. So here I was going to think that I'm working with dying people. I'm going to get out of here as fast as I can. But what I found was that it wasn't as scary as I thought, and that it really changed my perspective. And so my whole nursing career, I wanted to be a flight nurse. I had it all mapped out down to, each year what I was going to do. And it just went out the window because I fell in love with this community. This death and dying wasn't as scary. So all of my nursing career, pretty much, except for a little stint in pediatrics when my kids were young, really was around end of life nursing. I never thought it would be.
Yeah, I can't imagine that's the kind of thing most people go into their nursing careers thinking that they're going to do, right? And then I know that you're not actively nursing now. Obviously, you are now helping people with these conversations that have to take place at the, during this end of life period or in anticipation of the end of life period. I want to head in two different directions today.
Okay.
As we talk about this. So the first, and you and I were talking a little bit, off the air before we hit record on this, but I am one of the many, many people that is in, what's called that sandwich generation, where I have aging parents and family members, and I have young kids, right? And for myself in particular, I don't have any siblings. I don't have any cousin. It's just me and my husband to take care of my, two parents and my three aunts. And that is scary. It's not that death is necessarily so scary, but that being responsible for that is really scary. So I want to start with, because I'm certainly not the only one in that position. What can those of us who find ourselves there do to make things easier? And what conversations do we need to be having with our loved ones who are at various stages of the aging process?
Right away, I would address that elephant in the room with your parents. I don't know if you talk to them about these issues at all. And a lot of people, I don't know how old your parents are. I have an 86-year-old mother that doesn't like to talk about any of this. I've got my affairs in order, but she does. She'll tell me that all the time, but she doesn't want to address it. She doesn't want to talk about it. So I would get your parents together and say, Mom and Dad, here's the deal. It's me. And I want to make sure that as you're aging, I can honor what you want. And the only way I can do that is to know what you want. So I want to know, you might already know this. Do you have advanced directives done? Do you have that power of attorney? Do you have your estate planning done? Could we have a family meeting? If they're resistant to that, you might wait until either someone that they're close to dies, or maybe a celebrity who just recently died. Henry Belafonte, I think.
Yes.
Did you know Henry Belafonte just died? Or President Carter's in hospice. If that was you, how could I make sure I support and honor you? Can we start having those conversations? Because it's just me. I don't have any siblings, and I'd really like to be able to honor your wishes.
Yeah. I am so lucky in the sense that both of my parents are I have a pretty good sense of what they want. We do talk about this, and having known you for a number of years, I've made sure that I have talked to them. And as an attorney, I made darn sure that they had a will and all of those things in place. I've had perhaps less explicit conversations with my aunts, who I will also have some responsibility for. And I know there are a lot of people listening to this who are thinking, I have no idea what my parents want. I have no idea if they have a will. I have no idea if they have an advance directive. I don't even know what an advance directive is, right?
Right.
For those folks, so you've just given some great suggestions about saying, hey, using current events or a friend who has died. What do we do when those people that we love say, that's not, something to the effect of, it's none of your business. I've got it figured out, right? Because there's also this taboo about talking about money, and that sort of, I think, plays into all of this. So maybe you can talk about that a little bit. Like, how do we
Oh,
handle that?
you're speaking my mom's language. That's that generation where you kept everything close to the vest. You did not talk about your finances with anyone. You did not talk about grief. It's really can be challenging. So with my mom, I'm going to use my mom as an example. It's been very challenging over the years because I know that I am the executor of her will. I have 4 siblings, and I know that I think my brother and I are co-executors, which I don't know about co-executors, but I definitely discourage power of attorney for healthcare.
Yeah.
It is not a good idea, but I'm her healthcare decision maker, and she won't talk to me.
Oh.
So when something happens, just COVID, let's just take COVID. Let's hope we never go through anything quite like that again. But if your parents won't talk to you, you've got to respect that because it's their right to talk to you or not. And if there's any little crack in the wall that you can squeeze into, if there's maybe a health diagnosis, or maybe you find out that their blood pressure was high at the doctor's office, that I would start, gosh, mom and dad, I worry. I'm a sandwich generation person. And if you don't know what that is, that was my ideal target market. When I first started my business, I thought, that's who I am. Yeah. Everyone should be talking to their parents about this. But that's not who really, parents don't always want to talk to their kids about it. But if you could say, I have my kids to worry about, and I'm also really concerned about you. I want to make sure I do right by you. Or me and my siblings, would you have a family meeting with us? And if they say no, back off and then try again later on with something else. If something else happens, or Aunt Millie has a health issue, just keep trying. It might be that they'll never say anything, and that's okay. It's harder for the person that has to make decisions, but just keep trying in a gentle way and really honor their response to it. My mom diagnosed with COVID in November of 2020. She was like promising us she wasn't going out and about. My sister would catch her at the grocery store. They live in the same town. And my sister, Mom, but she ended up with COVID. And so I called her and I said, Mom, it's off the table now for you. You cannot not talk to me because 5 hours from now, you might not be breathing. And I need to know what you would want. So I laid out 3 scenarios for her. If you're not breathing in 5 hours from now, you want everything done. You want to just the whole 9 yards to make sure you survive, ventilator, everything that can be done. Or you would want to try, but it would be for a specific period of time, maybe try for a week. That would be if you could have even gotten on a ventilator back then. But if after a week, no improvement, you'd want to be taken off, or you want comfort measures only. And I said, I'm going to hang up now and I'm going to call you back in an hour. And I want you to think about this because we don't have time to not think about it now. So I called her back in an hour and she told me comfort measures only. And we talked a little bit about that, and she sailed through COVID, thank God. But that was the only time we've really talked a lot about that.
Yeah.
And the fact that she wants to age in place and die in her home. I said, well, Mom, you've never discussed finances with us. Do you have the financial means to do that? Because how can we support you to be able to age in place? That means you'd have to bring in a caregiver because she didn't want, my sister and my mom love each other dearly, but they'd kill each other. And she hates the weather in Seattle. She's a Southern California native, never will leave. So I said, that gives us the option of bringing in a caregiver, and that costs money. So let's talk about that. And she did open up a little bit. But so when those opportunities arise, if you have to be forthright because it's something serious, just say, I'm going to give you 3 choices and call back in an hour. And then that gives them time to process it. And also it puts them in control.
I love that. They still feel like you're not sort of barreling over them in that conversation. As you were just describing that. So I just turned 50, and my oldest, dearest friend sent me a book for my birthday called Stupid Things I Won't Do When I'm Old. And And it occurs to me, and I read it, I can't remember all of the different stupid things that, this guy was complaining that his parents or whoever had done that he wasn't going to do. But this feels like one of those things that I would talk, like stupid things I won't do personally, is not talk to my kids about this. I know that there's generational reasons for that, but I have to imagine that was also super stressful for you.
It was really stressful for me. And, I have 3 siblings and we all get along really well, but we all have different outlooks and different levels of emotion. And I said to my mom, okay, now that you've told me that, will you send out a text message so everyone has it in writing that if anything happens to you during COVID, this is what you'd want. And that's what you've instructed me to do. I have the power to make the decision, but I want to keep peace with my siblings too.
Yeah. As an only child, that's something I don't think about a lot. Although now I have more than one child, I think it would occur to me. But when we don't have those conversations, it's not just about us, right? We're affecting the person who is in charge of those decisions, but also all of those relationships, because we all know, and we've seen the movies about it, like death, dying, inheritance, all of that stuff can get real ugly real quick.
Real fast. Yeah. It does. And, it divides families for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
And that's actually why I went into the business I did. I'd known forever that I wanted people to have, I said, even if you don't get your estate planning done, which I think you should, but I was telling people for 25 years, get that healthcare power of attorney documentation completed. You just want to have that one person that can legally speak on your behalf. Because if it's someone with multiple siblings or multiple children, and that's their next of kin, all those children are their next of kin.
Yeah.
And all the children have to agree. And usually they don't. That's like, I could have seen disagreement because of emotions, where of course we're all going to be really emotional when my mom dies. My dad died a number of years ago, and just the emotions then. But I don't want to ruin the relationship with my siblings,
right,
because of not agreeing on what to do with my mom.
Right. And that is something that, she obviously has a lot of power to remedy before it even happens.
Yes.
Which is why I'm like, okay, note to self. I'm going to also make sure when the time comes that the people that need to know, at this point in my life with my children young, like my husband knows.
Right.
But eventually that will not be him as much as it will be my children needing to know that.
Before I'd even thought of starting my business, my 3 sons, they're all like best friends with each other. They get along so well. And they were all either in college or grad school, and they were all heading back. And I said, we're having a family meeting, because I thought, I don't want, my husband and I had just turned 55. It's time for another meeting. I said, we were going to have one every 5 years. I said, I don't want you guys to have to guess if something happened to us. I want you to know everything from me and from, I told my husband, we're doing this with the kids, but I thought I'd get pushback, but we didn't, because I've talked a lot to my kids over the years about death and dying. And when people have died, we've talked about it. But I said, I want you to know directly from me if you would ever have to make a decision on my behalf.
Yeah.
And I wanted them to know who my decision makers were and why I chose them. And so we had a family meeting at the holidays. I said, I want 4 hours of your time. It might take 2 hours. It might take 6, but I want you to block out 4 hours. And we actually had a lot of fun. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of tears, mostly on my part. But they know where everything is. They know where all of the files with our insurance policies, with our passwords, how to access everything, our estate planning. And then we went through our advanced directives, which is the power of attorney for healthcare and living will, and what we would want if anything happened. Because I said, I don't want you guys ever like going after each other because you disagree what should be done. I want you to hear right from me. And we're going to talk about it every so many years. And then as your dad and I get older, we're going to do it maybe annually. Or if we have a health diagnosis that would be life limiting. I would do it annually or more often, just so they always know my wishes.
Yeah. What an incredible gift to give them. I mean, maybe not the traditional holiday gift.
No, but I found out one of my sons. Okay, so we were laughing because even though my son had gone to college in Montana, he's like, okay, I've gotten to like country music from living in Montana, but if I'm ever in a coma, do not play country music, And we were laughing about what kind of music we'd want, and my middle son, who played a lot of sports and had a couple concussions, he said, if anything happens to me, I want my brain donated to Boston University's CTE study so that maybe they could learn something. Yeah. I would have never, ever in a million years thought of that.
Well, isn't that an interesting thing to think about, that, our kids, to think they might have wishes too for what happens if something were to ever happen to them, which is a really interesting segue into this sort of the second question that I wanted to go into today, because death is such a difficult topic for so many people to think about in general, to think about with relation to their parents. But then when they think about talking about death or exposing their kids to death, it tends to shut people down. And so this may seem like a dumb question, but why is death such a scary thing for so many of us in our culture?
Because we don't talk about it, because we don't know it. Death used to be communal. People died at home, and they had the family and the neighbors and the relatives all in and out and helping with the process. And then the body was laid out in the parlor for people to come pay their respects. And then with the advent of modern medicine and antibiotics, and it switched to save lives instead of letting people die naturally. And so it's scary because we don't know it. Like most people, I talked to a guy that was almost 65 and he said, I've never, ever seen a dead body. And I said, most people haven't.
Yeah.
They don't have open casket funerals very often anymore. I'm Catholic. I haven't been in an open casket funeral in 40 years probably. And there's mostly cremation. There's other forms, but people, we don't know death. So it scares us. But I'll tell you, kids are not afraid of it.
Yeah.
They're not afraid of it. Like parents, the parents are afraid to talk to their kids, but the kids aren't afraid of it like we are. I'm going to share a story. I have a nephew who's 30 now, but he was, I think, 9 years old, and he was visiting us. And my husband is a cardiologist. And we were at dinner, and he was saying, Uncle Peter, do any of your patients die? And my husband talked around it. And then he said, but Uncle Peter, do any of them die? Oh, Peter, another story, talked around it. And on the third time he said, but do any of your patients die? I said, yes, Tim, some of them do. He deals with older people. And as we age, we're eventually going to die. All of us will eventually die. So yes, some of his patients do. And he's like, oh, okay, great. And he went on with the next conversation, all he wanted to know. And it really just hit home again, how kids aren't afraid of it. They just become afraid because we make them afraid to talk about it.
There are so many times in doing the work that I do and in hosting this podcast that I've been like, oh my gosh, parallel. So it feels to me like the same thing in talking to kids about sex, right? Yeah. For them, it's just information, right? It's just part of life. And, it's not a big deal, especially when we start with them when they're young. And yet we are so, panicky about talking about it. And it strikes me that talking about money, which, I interviewed John Alvarado on this podcast about money. And, that's one of those things that's so hard for parents to talk to their kids about. And this feels like yet another one, that there's all these taboos and we have all these fears. And the kids are like, yeah, just information. It's just information.
It's just information. I always say with kids, get them goldfish. That is the best way to teach about death, because those things, rarely do they live long. I know some can, but they're gone in a week to a month or whatever. And so we used to have the burial, and we'd go do the whole little funeral ceremony. But it teaches kids about death. I think that's one of the good things about animals. It's hard, but that's why I think goldfish, you can't get really attached to a goldfish like you can a dog or a cat.
True. Okay. This is totally making me giggle as you're mentioning goldfish, because I just have to share this story. So when my older daughter was in kindergarten, we got her a goldfish we had a fish tank. I don't know if it was a goldfish, some kind of fish for her birthday. And she knew that fish lived in water, right? What she didn't know, and what I apparently didn't explain, is that fish actually have to be in water all the time. So I walked into her bedroom and her fish was in the tank, and it was not doing well. It wasn't, I don't think it had died yet, but it was not doing well. And I was like, oh, she'd had this fish for a few days. Oh my God, Macy, what happened? Well, I took it out to play with it, she says. And I felt terrible. I felt really, really guilty about this poor fish, because it was my failure to communicate this critical information. But that was her first experience with death. And I giggle about it because it's just funny and horrifying at the same time. But it was also really a great learning experience for her about sometimes things happen to our bodies and we can't continue. Right.
Yeah. I just would encourage any parent, if a child asks a question, answer it that's age appropriate for them. They really do have such a curiosity.
Yeah.
And I know I was sheltered so much from all of that. I knew, like, I was in second grade when my grandpa died, and I knew I had the concept of dying, but I didn't really have any idea what it meant. And I knew he was sick and that something was going to happen, but he had made my grandmother go out and buy this little brown fur coat. I grew up in Southern California. I don't know why I ever had a brown fur coat, but I had wanted this. And I had told him about it. He was sick in bed I don't know if he was in the hospital then, but so then I got it in my mind, well, I'm going to wear that brown fur coat because if I do, he'll never die, even though I had no idea what dying was. So I just knew if I wear it. Well, pretty soon he died and he wasn't there anymore. And I couldn't understand it because I'd worn my brown fur coat every single day and I think how different it would have been if my mom, it was her father, had just sat me down and talked about what was happening with him.
Yes. And I think there may be parents listening saying, I mean, that's a cute story. And it's also kind of sad because you're right. Nobody talked to you about what that really meant.
And then no one talked to me about it after, like we went to the funeral. And then that was it.
And that was the end of it.
And I loved my grandpa. I still have that brown fur coat hanging in my closet.
Oh my goodness.
The back of my closet. I just think I might not have been as afraid of death as I was at 22 getting my first nursing job.
I had never seen a dead body for many, many years. I remember I did attend one open casket funeral early on in my legal career and did not even know what to do with that. And then I had to attend autopsies and homicide scenes, and that gives you a whole different perspective on death in the body. But I knew that it was one of those things that I knew I needed to do something different than was done for me. Wasn't really sure what that was. And so when my grandmother was dying about 5 years ago, she lived on the East Coast, and I ended up going out to be with her and taking my two girls with me, mostly out of necessity, because I didn't have childcare and my husband was trying to work, and I had just quit my law job. And then we all ended up, my husband was there and my parents, and my two girls, who at the time were not quite 2 and 8, I think 9, were with me as my grandmother died. And they saw her sort of go from lucid and talking with us and having a meal to actually being in the room when she died. And I thought that would be a terrifying, horrible experience. And one, it was such a privilege for me to sort of usher her into that, into her death, but also for my children, to see that and to be a part of that and to be talking about it. It took weeks. My grandmother was very stubborn. And now I think about that as such a precious, wonderful time, But I often recount that story to people and they think, oh my gosh, I would never let my kids watch somebody die. And so I'm sort of curious, from all the work that you've done with death and all the families that you've worked with, what should families do in that circumstance?
I think they should do whatever they feel comfortable with, but I would highly encourage, like, what a gift you gave your kids. It will help take the fear away from them. And as people die, they won't be so afraid. My kids went to a small school, but they had a principal that died. And no one, they did have meetings, parent meetings, and about how to handle it. And the parents were terrified of talking to their kids about it. But then my youngest son, his 5th grade class, in the years that he went through 8th grade, 3 of the parents between 5th grade and 8th grade died. It was 5th grade and 7th grade died. 2 women. One of them was my best friend here in Seattle. But I remember being at this parent meeting, and it was a religious school, so we had the priest there, and parents were just like, oh, we don't know what to say. They're asking if we're going to die. And everyone was just in this state of heightened emotion and fear. And I remember saying, what did you say to them? Oh, I told them, no, absolutely not. We're not going to die. And I said, well, but there is the possibility that we will die. And I said, so I've had the same conversation with my kids, but I had it all along. But I said, I told them there's the possibility that I will die or your dad will die before you graduate from high school. But the probability is very, very low. Most likely, we are both going to be alive and well by the time you graduate from high school, but there's always that possibility. So ask me what questions you need to ask and we'll talk about it. And we had a great conversation. And so as I even saw some of their friends like being really fearful about this, my kids were like, oh, your parents, there's a good possibility, but there's the possibility, but probability is really low. So hearing them repeat what I said, and then they were talking to them, but watching the fear in these kids that it could happen to their parents, but not addressing it in a way that they could understand was really hard to watch. And I think, like, just going back, that kids can handle more than we give them credit for.
Yeah, that's just really drives home for me the idea that oftentimes in our attempt to protect them, we might be increasing their anxiety and their fear and their worry. And nobody, if I asked any parent, if I said, well, do you want your kid to feel really anxious and worried and fearful as they move through life? I don't know a single parent that would say, yeah, that seems like a great idea, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes the way that we avoid that is counterintuitive, especially in our culture where we don't talk about this.
Well, I'm going to share a quick story about the 2 mothers that were mothers in my youngest son's class, of kids in my youngest son's class. And one of them, as I said, was my closest friend from the first day we met when our kids were in preschool. My oldest son and her oldest son were good friends. They were best friends. They still are very close. The day she was diagnosed with cancer, I said, do you want me to help talk to your kids? No. I'm going to be okay. They know I'm sick, but I'm not going to die from this. So I'm not going to talk to them. Well, then my son, she was like the second mom to all of my sons, but my son came and said, Mom, Mrs. G, is she really sick? And I said, well, she's been diagnosed with cancer and, luckily it's one that she has a good chance of surviving. Well, she didn't have a good chance. She relapsed after her first chemo, but she would never talk to her kids about what was happening to her. And I said, Barbara, I'll help you. I'll do this. We can role play so that it'll be easier for you. Nope. I am not dying until her final lucid breath that she took. She still denied that she was dying and never talked to her kids about that.
Oh.
And watching her 11 and 14-year-olds struggle through. And then another mom in the class that I didn't really know so well, she died of cancer the following summer. And one of my friends was driving with her son that was between 2nd and 3rd grade, I guess. And they were driving by this cemetery in our area. And this little boy said to my friend, that's where my mom's buried. And my friend said, really? And he said, yes, she wanted us to know where her physical body would be in case we ever missed her, and that we could go there and be with her physical body. But really, her soul lives in us forever. And so she told us, really, she's going to be in our hearts and in our souls forever. And that we can talk to her anytime because she lives in us. But if we needed to be near her physical body, we could go there. And I was just like, as my friend was telling me, she's like, why couldn't our friend say that? And I said, because it would have been admitting death. But watching those two kids, of the woman who had the courage to have that, I don't know how she did it, that courageous conversation, her kids, sure, there were moments that it was hard for them, but they grew up with a whole different perspective of death and dying than my friend's kids did. And
Yeah.
so to watch that was really hard. They've all come out on the other side, but it was a hard journey. And I think, gosh, what would I have done? I mean, we never know what we'd done, but I always hope that I would have been more like that woman that shared what was happening with her and helped her children prepare.
Yeah. I mean, those stories are both heartbreaking because, of course, children are not supposed to lose their parents
No,
at
they're
a
not.
young age. Parents are not supposed to lose their children at a young age, right? That's not the way it's supposed to go.
No, that's not the natural way.
But again, and I think, the word that keeps coming up again and again in this conversation today is that idea of gifts, right? That was a gift that mom gave to her children. The family 4-hour family meeting that you had, maybe, as I said, maybe an unconventional holiday gift, but a gift nonetheless. And so I'm walking, like, as I'm thinking about this, for me, from my perspective, and I don't want to decide what anybody else should do, but it certainly felt like a gift to me and to my children to usher my grandmother into death. And so I'm sitting here thinking to myself, well, what are the next gifts in this area that need to be given, right? What conversations need to be had with my parents, with my children, with my, husband?
I really think the more that we can gather family, I mean, now it's just you and your parents and your aunts, but gather them together and say, I just want to gather you together and talk about this. And you know what? When the time's right, I want to bring my kids in and have them present for part of it, for what's right for their age. If they're late teenagers, young adults, bring them in because they can handle it. And then they feel like they're part of the conversation, and they'll have a better way of handling things as life progresses, because life's going to progress for all of us. None of us know when we're going to take our last breath, where we're going to live our last moment of life. But the more we can talk about it, the more we can have the hope that it's going to go the way we want, and that those around us will have peace with it. There's grief no matter what. People are going to grieve, whether they're young, whether they're old, whether they're sandwich generation. When someone that matters to us dies, we're going to grieve. That's just the natural process. But to be able to grieve in a healthy, healing way is so much better than grieving with regret. I should have done this. I should have done that. If only. We're going to always have a little bit of that. I always say regret's sort of unnecessary if we say the things we need to say and do the things we need to do. But there's studies that people that have really engaged hospice in their end of life early on, not for the last week or two, which is what most people on board hospice, but really embrace the whole hospice experience. They work through that very emotional grief in a healthier way. They come out of it with a healthier outlook than those that don't have these conversations, that don't know. Like my uncle, I was his healthcare decision maker, and it was really hard. He was 87 and a half. He'd moved down to Palm Desert and just driven up to Seattle 2 weeks before he died. He didn't wake up one morning. And we had so many conversations about what he would want. even though we thought he'd lived to 100, driving up and down the West Coast, playing golf and everything, it was easy for me to tell the doctors, even in my grief at knowing that my beloved uncle was not going to be of this world much longer. The doctors wanted to do surgery and go in and evacuate a brain bleed that he had. And I kept asking them questions. Will he be able to live alone and independently? Will he be able to play golf? They kept saying, no, but we might be able to get him speaking again. I'm like, that's not good enough. He gave me very clear instructions on what was acceptable and unacceptable for him if I could possibly make that happen. And so it was very hard, very emotional, but it was such a gift he gave me because I knew exactly what he wanted and I could stand firm with that doctor that was trying to get me to do something else, to say, no, I have to honor. This is what he wanted and this is what I'm honoring. And his daughter, he chose me because he knew it would be hard for his daughter. You know, it was a great gift for both she and I because she was on board, but she didn't have to have that conversation with the doctor. She didn't have to be the one making that decision. And that's the gift that parents give to their adult children. It's the gift that we adult children give to our younger children and to those that matter most to us by letting them know our wishes. So I think get those decided, have the family conversations, gather in anyone that you consider family, those that matter most to you, and just share.
That is such a lovely note to end this conversation on, and sort of wraps up so beautifully that theme that we kind of stumbled on here, which is gifts. Yeah. I have to add to that and say, Maureen, it's been a real gift to have you here talking about this with us, because it's not something we talk a lot about. And I think we all are I know I'm walking away from this saying, even with all the things I know and the things that I've done, there are still some conversations I know that need to be had. So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Christy.
All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Maureen. You know, as I said at the beginning, I know that it can be really difficult to talk about death and dying, particularly in the context of our personal lives, right? Like our parents, our children. That's not always a fun conversation, but I hope that we made it maybe a little bit lighter for you. I feel terrible because as Maureen and I were talking, and I was so wrapped up in her stories and in her just gentle, loving, generous nature, I neglected to give her the chance to share a really important resource that she has available for you. So if you go to startthettalknow.com, you can download her starter guide, which is entitled, Does Speaking of Dying Scare You to Death? 7 Prompts to Get the Conversation Started. It is a fabulous, useful download that really can help you if you know that there are conversations you need or want to have with, you know, those people in your life who are aging. And I think it can also help all of us as we think about the conversations that we would like to have when the time is right with our own children, right? About our aging. I would love to get the word out about this podcast and all our amazing guests to as many parents and caregivers out there as we can. Be sure to like and rate this podcast. I'm so grateful to all of you who have shared 5-star reviews so far. Please keep sending out the love. And with that, I will sign off for the week, and I will see you next week. Take care.